everyone, welcome to this panel. So first of all, I want to congratulate TRISE for creating what is an incredible safe space for us all to learn from each other as we explore the theory and practice of imagining and enacting radically different worlds. So the idea of burnout was touched on yesterday within our social movements. So moments like this are crucial for building networks of solidarity across the world. Alternatives to capitalism are being practiced in pockets across the world, so we all play a role in strengthening and connecting these movements. On that note, I'm very excited about the panel we have here today. We have Markus. Hello, Markus. Skyping in there.
Hello.
We have George, Dimitri, and Eve. So I wanted as much time for the speakers, so we're going to go straight into it. So Markus Lundström from Stockholm is going to present to us on the tensions of municipalism, a historical sketch of the Anarchism-Democracy divide. Take it away, Markus.
Okay, can you all hear me properly?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm really refreshed. I cannot be there. I had some family obligations over here, so I cannot attend physically. So it's great that I can have the opportunity to present this paper over Skype. But my name is Markus, and I'm a researcher at the Swedish Labour Movement's Archives and Library here in Sweden, in Stockholm, and also at Stockholm University. So my contribution to this panel is to try to situate the municipalism historically, and that is in the political tradition of anarchist ideas and actions. To do so, I will outline the divisive understandings of democracy and also radical democracy that has been nurtured in anarchist thought since its very onset in the 19th century. Anarchism is clearly an ideology defined by severe disloyalty to ruling and governance. But how has that tradition of democracy, how has the notion of democracy been interrogated throughout anarchist history? Well, this is a question that I have been studying for some while. I did a systematic reading of most of the influential anarchist texts from Giorgos Papahristodoulou, the classic, and onwards into contemporary theory. And from this reading, I will very shortly present. I have identified three approaches to democracy within the anarchist tradition. Firstly, I have seen an anarchist critique of democracy, and secondly, what I call a reclamation of democracy, of the democracy concept, and thirdly, a reclaimed critique of democracy. In the following, I will present each of these three approaches with some select examples from the anarchist history of ideas. But let us begin with the definitions, which is always tricky. But anarchy, the notion of anarchy and anarchism clearly has numerous definitions. But I would say anarchy is often generically understood as a type of condition that allows life without rulers, while anarchism is the political ideology that seeks to establish anarchy. So organized anarchists have for some 150 years or so fought against governance and the concentrations of power created by capitalism and the state. And one of Finland's most prominent anarchist organizers in the late 19th century, she's called Montreal, and she defined anarchism. I would start with her definitions. I choose hers, her definitions. She defined anarchism as a struggle against the very logic of domination. She wrote that, and I quote, "The leading manifestations of this obstructive tendency at this present moment are property, or dominion over things, domination over things, the denial of the claim of others to their use and authority, the government man by man, embodied in majority rule, that theory of representation, which, whilst admitting the claim of the individual to self-guidance, renders him the slave of the simulacrum that now stands for society. Unquote. So, in Wilson's list of governance, find three particular themes that have infused anarchism's critique of democracy. That is, authority, representation, and majority rule. So the classical anarchists, in their critique of democracy, frequently came to attack the notion of authority, the very principle of governance. Authority, they believe, is what hinders the community or the individual from self-determination and autonomy. But classical anarchism postulated that democracy, seen by universal suffrage, will inevitably be managed through representation, that is, by a small minority of elected governors, which in turn produces unnecessary and undesirable hierarchies. So if the majority,
sorry, Markus?
that is, people somehow achieve state power, classical anarchist thinkers for around the sun.
Yeah, we're slightly losing you in the last minute. If you want to recap, I don't know.
What? Sorry.
We've just lost you in the last minute.
Perhaps if people
In
shut
the
down their Wi-Fi connection so it ease space for him. On their phone, you can.
Oh yeah. Okay, Markus, we're just going to turn off the video so that we can hear you better.
Okay.
Am I doing that right? How do I?
Markus will do that.
Oh yeah.
Yes. Do you hear me better now?
Yeah. Could you turn your video off from your side?
Yes, I tried. All right, the video's up.
Yeah, we can hear you good now. Yeah, go for it.
So what did you do is authority representation and majority rule. That's three distinctive components of the classical critique of democracy. And these three elements of the anarchist critique of democracy is especially notable in the political thinking of Emma Goldman, one of the movement's most influential figures in the early 1900s. And quite finally, given the mainstream feminism of Emma Goldman's day, at least in the early 1900s, she attacked a cornerstone of democracy, namely suffrage, the right to vote. So, and she was not alone in this. Along with anarchist feminists around the globe, Emma Goldman expressed a severe disbelief in the political potential of the ballot. Do you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, perfect.
Great, then I continue. So she wrote an essay called Women's Suffrage, and in this essay she declared, and I quote, women can get suffrage or the ballot no new quality, nor can she receive anything from it that will enhance her own quality. Her development, her freedom, her independence must come from and through herself. Unquote. Emma Goldman here advances an analysis that was developed 50 years earlier by, namely by Mikhail Bakunin, and namely that governmental power, Bakunin said, regardless who's wielding it, will inevitably produce social hierarchies. A government, however progressive, requires by definition a people to govern. So in parliamentary democracy, the driving mechanism to entire governance is that of representation, elected officials speaking for the people. So Bakunin articulated in the 1870s what Emma Goldman found significant for the anarchist struggle in her own time, that the problem of domination cannot be cured by inverting social hierarchies. As Bakunin spoke out against the working class overtaking the state, Goldman criticized women's desire to partake in governmental affairs. But besides authority and representation, Emma Goldman also targeted the notion of majority rule. In her essay called Minorities versus Majorities, she wrote that, quote, "The majority, that compact, immobile, drowsy mass will always be the annihilator of individuality, of free initiative and originality," unquote. Emma Goldman's critique of electoral democracy and of women's suffrage was also rooted in egoist anarchism, which I will have not time to develop here, but this line of thought can be said very shortly to underline Bakunin's famous statement that, and Bakunin said, "I'm only truly free when all human beings, men and women, are equally free." Thus we might say that classical anarchism produced a profound critique of democracy. However, in the geopolitical context, the Cold War, a most peculiar thing happened to an understanding of democracy. While anarchism was concentrated on criticizing democracy, post-classical anarchism, that is anarchism after the Spanish Civil War, increasingly set out to reclaim the concept. So the dominant version of democracy in this time was decorated with various pejorative adjectives, like false democracy, capitalist democracy, and so on. And instead, anarchists took up a call for a more radical democracy. I call this an anarchist reclamation of democracy. That is an urge to promote anarchy as true democracy. And this line of thought has, as you know, been particularly developed by Moravsky, but also it's like non-Chomsky. While they remain critical to the dominant state capitalist version of democracy, they do see potential to radicalize the participatory aspects of democracy. And these tendencies, today, these tendencies of also municipalism are today explored in most vibrant and promising polities across the globe. I would, however, argue that the anarchist reclamation of democracy also holds a parallel line of thought, which is not so often spoken of. And this is a view that in democracy is approached as a step toward anarchy. And this is especially notable in the Uruguayan anarchist Lucy Fabri. She wrote in the 1980s that, she wrote, "Democracy and anarchy are not mutually contradictory, but one represents an advance upon the other. In fact, there is a diametrical opposition between the rights of the majority upon which democracy is built, and the free consent that is characteristic of libertarian solutions. That is, the difference is a difference degree." So here Fabri distinguishes between democracy and anarchy, but at the same time describes the radicalization of democracy as a tactical step, however tiny, towards a freer and more equal world. Furthermore, alongside these trends, the anarchist movement has recently come to reclaim the classical anarchist critique of democracy. I call this a reclaimed critique. So the developments of fascism and extreme right populism seems to have revived the disbelief in democracy altogether. One articulated example is a project launched by the Anarchist collective, Frankie, and the project is called From Democracy to Freedom. And here, notion of majority rule is once again targeted for limiting individuality and minority groups from achieving autonomy. But the reclaimed critique of democracy has also teased out additional threads of anarchist thought, especially regarding the exposed hierarchy between human and non-human animals. Democracy is a political system that still excludes non-human animals and nature in general, which in turn legitimates violence and exploitation to the extreme. The anarchist organizing stemming from groups such as Animal Liberation Front builds precisely on this critique of democracy as a structure with catastrophic consequences for non-human animals exploited by the capitalist meat and dairy industries. So, to summarize, I think we can see two main understandings of democracy in the history of anarchist thought. On the one hand, we have the anarchist critique of democracy, a defiant composition arrayed against authority, representation, and majority rule. On the other hand, we have the anarchist reclamation, the understanding of anarchy as democracy radicalized. And these divisive lines of thought, they coexist historically, and the most continue into our days. But in an attempt to recognize dialogue between them, I would suggest that the reclaimed critique prompt, and this is what I call the impossible argument. The impossible argument is simply this, an urge to render domination and governance impossible, in an indefinite truth toward anarchy. This political imperative instigates at once destruction of institutions and practices that makes rule possible, and construction of alternative sets of social relations that impede authority from growing anew. But Kuhn famously said, which is quite topical for this conference, that the desire for destruction is also a creative desire. Hence the impossible argument craves that which is now possible, a free world of many worlds, so far from, yet so very near the world as we know it today. Such a course, set on disabling domination, will mean no less than to, as the Italian anarchist Enrico Malatesta once put it, and I conclude this, to walk toward anarchy today, tomorrow, and always. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Markus. So there's 3 more presentations, and then there will be questions afterwards. Is that okay?
Great.
Yeah.
Can you please turn the video on and put it so I can see those who speak? Is it possible?
Oh. Yes. For the next one, but not your one, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, 2 seconds. How's that?
Great, that's great. Thanks.
Great. Okay, so next we have Giorgos Papahristodoulou, which is my Irish pronunciation of his name, and he's going to present on the significance of the city for social ecology. Thank you, George.
Thank you. Καλημέρα. Η εισήγηση θα είναι στα ελληνικά και θα μεταφράσω εντόνως. Και να ευχαριστήσω και το TRISE φυσικά για την πρόσκληση, τα ονόματα και τα παιδιά, την οργανωτική ομάδα που κάνει τόση δουλειά και τρέχει αυτές τις μέρες. Λοιπόν, ναι, χρόνια πολλά κιόλας. Σε πολλά κείμενα του Μάρι Μπούκτσιν, θεμελιωτή της κοινωνικής οικολογίας, συναντάμε στο αρχαιολογικό πρωτότυπο τη λέξη πόλης. Αυτό δεν συμβαίνει εξαιτίας κάποιας ανεξήγητης αρχαιοπληξίας που τυχόν διακατήχε το στοχαστή, φαινόμενο συνηθισμένο για όσους προσεγγίζουν την ιστορία με όρους κυριαρχίας, με όρους ανώτερων και κατώτερων πολιτισμών.
Good morning to everybody. First of all, I would like to thank TRISE and the organizing committee for inviting me in this excellent conference. And χρόνια πολλά του Dimitri Roussopoulos. I would like to start my speech by saying that Mari Bookchin, who is the theorist of social, a very important theorist of social ecology, has talked about the polis, the city, not because he was had a sick love about the ancient times, as happens with historians who see history from the prism of domination.
Για τον Bookchin, η ανάδυση της πόλης αποτελεί ένα από τα σημεία καμπής στην ιστορική εξέλιξη. Το άτομο βρήκε σε αυτήν το πεδίο στο οποίο σχημάτισε σχέσεις με τους άλλους, σε ρήξη με τις προγονικές σχέσεις που βασίζονταν σε δεσμούς αίματος, δηλαδή φιλή, χωριό. Αναφέρει ο ίδιος. Η πόλη αντικατέστησε σε ολοένα μεγαλύτερο βαθμό το βιολογικό δεδομένο της καταγωγής και το τυχαίο γεγονός της γέννησης σε μια ιδιαίτερη συγγενική ομάδα, με το κοινωνικό δεδομένο του τόπου μόνιμης διαμονής και οικονομικών συμφερόντων. Αυτά τα γράφει στο «Ξαναφτιάχνοντας την κοινωνία», που εκδόθηκε πρώτη φορά το 1989 από το Black Rose Books, το Remaking Society, όπως είναι στα αγγλικά δηλαδή.
According to Mari Bookchin, the rise of the city was an important moment in history because inside the city, citizens are able to come into social/political relations and connections with each other, which supersede the traditional and hierarchical relations that are connected, can be found in small communities and are connected with the blood, with the village, the familial relations, and very close economic interests. And he has analyzed this importance of the city in his book Remaking Society.
Αυτή η ανάδυση της πόλης, με επίκεντρο τον μεσογειακό κόσμο, συνοδεύεται από τρία σημαντικά στοιχεία, τα οποία κατά τη γνώμη μου αξίζει να κρατήσουμε και στο σήμερα. Το πρώτο από αυτά, την αίσθηση και την αξίωση μιας οικουμενικής ισότητας. Η ιδέα ότι οι άνθρωποι έμοιαζαν στα βασικά τους σημεία, ανεξάρτητα από τη φυλή ή το χωριό που κατάγονταν, άρχισε να κερδίζει έδαφος υπερισχύοντας των εθνικών διαφορών, γράφει ο ίδιος. Το δεύτερο σημείο είναι η εμφάνιση ενός ατομικού δικαιώματος. Οι άνθρωποι δηλαδή άρχισαν να είναι σε θέση να επιλέγουν και να αλλάζουν την κοινωνική τους κατάσταση. Και το τρίτο σημείο, σημαντικό για το σήμερα, είναι η διεύρυνση της έννοιας της αστικής κοινότητας. Ο ξένος ή ο εκτός τυπικότητας, αναφέρει ο Bookchin, μπορούσε τώρα να βρει ασφαλή θέση σε μια ευρεία κοινότητα ανθρώπινων όντων. Παρότι αυτή η διεύρυνση της έννοιας της αστικής κοινότητας είχε μερικό χαρακτήρα, είναι χαρακτηριστικό το καθεστώς του μέτικου στην αρχαία Αθήνα. Γι' αυτό.
Okay, the rise of the city, which took place, according to Bookchin again, started in the Mediterranean, is still very important today because of three elements. Because of the demand for equality among the citizens beyond national differences, because of the individual rights which were granted to each citizen, each participant in the city, and because of the fact that in the city a type of urban community was constructed which was relatively open to foreigners, relatively open because there were of course restrictions and the hierarchies also in cities in ancient times.
Σε αυτό το σημείο καμπής στην ιστορία δημιουργούνται δηλαδή νέοι κοινωνικοί θεσμοί και η άμεση δημοκρατία αποτελεί το πολίτευμα εκείνο το οποίο επιδιώκει την ατομική και συλλογική αυτοπραγμάτωση. Αυτά δεν συμβαίνουν μέσα σε μία νύχτα, ούτε σημαίνουν ένα κάποιο τέλος της ιστορίας. Με τα λόγια, με τον τρόπο ενός καλλιεργητή γης, φτιάχνουν ένα σπόρο που γονιμοποιείται αιώνες αργότερα και συγκεκριμένα τον 14ο αιώνα στις μεσαιωνικές πόλεις.
The city was the locus where new social institutions arose, where direct democracy was born, and where individual and social empowerment were able to thrive. This procedure of the rise of these social institutions was gradual and constant across history, developed gradually, and seeds which were found in ancient times also gave birth in the 14th century to the medieval cities of the 14th century.
Εκείνη την εποχή, το 14ο αιώνα, παρουσιάζεται ένας εναλλακτικός δρόμος, εκείνος της αυτοκυβέρνησης και της Ομοσπονδίας των Ελεύθερων Δήμων, σε αντίθεση με το έθνος κράτος, το οποίο θα επικρατήσει δια πυρός και σιδήρου οριστικά τον 19ο αιώνα. Πρόκειται για την εποχή της Σίβητας, δηλαδή της πολιτείας ελεύθερων ατόμων, σε αντίθεση με τον ψυχρό ορισμό της πόλης ως urbs, ενός αθροίσματος κτηρίων δηλαδή. Όπως θα πει χαρακτηριστικά ο Γάλλος Ρουσό, τα σπίτια κάνουν τα σπίτια κάνουν την πόλη, μάλλον τα σπίτια κάνουν τον οικισμό, αλλά οι πολίτες κάνουν την πόλη. Είναι το αντίστοιχο του αρχαιοελληνικού άνδρες γαρ πόλης.
The medieval cities were a model of self-government and a federation of cities, which was the opposite at that time of history the opposite of the rising nation state. These were the times of the civitas, of free citizens, which was completely different from the urbs, which is it's just the adding the number of houses of the city and not of social relations.
Τα σπίτια κάνουν τον νοικισμό, μα οι πολίτες δεν μπορούν.
Okay. And as Rousseau said, houses construct the residents, but citizens construct the polis.
Ας σταθούμε σε μία από τις αξίες αυτής της εποχής, η οποία μετουσιώνεται σε αρετή. Πρόκειται για την έννοια του αυτοπεριορισμού, η οποία προκύπτει από ένα βαθύ αίσθημα δέσμευσης απέναντι στην πολιτική κοινότητα. Πρόκειται για μία αξία την οποία συναντάμε και στην αρχαιοελληνική πόλη και μας βοηθά να επαναδιεκδικήσουμε την έννοια του πολίτη ως συμμέτοχος στη λήψη των κρίσιμων πολιτικών αποφάσεων. Ο πολίτης μιας προκαπιταλιστικής πόλης δεν είναι ούτε πελάτης του κοινοβουλευτικού αντιπροσώπου, ούτε κάποιος φορολογούμενος. Δεν είναι δηλαδή αριθμός.
In the medieval cities, a very important element of the citizen was the self-restraint. The self-restraint of citizens was viewed as an obligation towards the urban community, and this principle was also present in the ancient Greek city. This notion of the citizen as a self-restraint participant in the political decisions is at a distance, a long distance from the contemporary notion of the citizen as a client of his or her representative and as a person under the obligation to pay taxes. In other words, as the not as an individual, not as a person, but as a number.
Και φτάνουμε στη σύγχρονη Μητρόπολη, ένα πλεονέκτημα της οποίας μπορεί να είναι το αίσθημα της ανωνυμίας σε συνδυασμό με την υπόσχεση της περιπλάνησης, σε έναν κόσμο αλλεπάλληλων συγκινήσεων. Είναι η υπόσχεση του ξεπεράσματος του σωματικού μόχθου που χαρακτηρίζει τη ζωή στην Ύπαιθρο. Υπόσχεση την οποία γρήγορα κατέριψε η βαθιά εκμετάλλευση του βιομηχανικού προλεταριάτου από τον ανερχόμενο καπιταλισμό.
And after these words, we arrive at the contemporary metropolis, which is characterized by the anonymity of its residents, in which the wandering around of the contemporary individual has been seen as the means to transcend the toil of the countryside, and which, of course, was not realized, as we can, of course, see in the industrial proletariat.
Εκδηλώνεται έτσι ένα βαθύ αίσθημα δυσφορίας, το οποίο θα τροφοδοτήσει τα κινήματα αμφισβήτησης της δεκαετίας του 60 και ταυτόχρονα παρατηρείται η αντίστροφη κίνηση, η λεγόμενη προαστιοποίηση. Έχουμε δηλαδή μια διάχυση της κουλτούρας της Μητρόπολης στον αγροτικό χώρο.
The conditions of in the contemporary metropolis have caused a discontent which created a counter movement of going back to the suburbs, the suburbanization of cities, and the movements, many social movements, such as the movements in the 60s.
Επειδή έχω ένα λεπτό, θα το συμπυκνώσω. Αυτά τα ερωτήματα θα απασχολήσουν τον Bookchin 20 χρόνια πριν το Remaking Society, το 1973 στο περίφημο βιβλίο του «Τα όρια της πόλης», όπου εκεί διατυπώνεται με σαφήνεια η ανάγκη για ένα ξεπέρασμα της σύγχρονης πόλης για μια οικοκοινότητα.
These questions have already been very important for Bookchin before, already from 1973, in his book Limits
Limits of the City.
Limits of the City, in which he discussed about the need to transcend the city and return to rural ecological communities.
Και για να ολοκληρώσω με ένα συμπέρασμα, από την αναδρομή στην ιστορία της πόλης διακρίνεται μια όψη της η οποία δείχνει ότι η πόλη μπορεί να βιωθεί ως ένας δυνάμει χώρος ελευθερίας, δημιουργίας και αμεσοδημοκρατικής πολιτικής απόφασης. Αυτό μπορούν να το κάνουν μόνο οι πολίτες, έχοντας κατά τη γνώμη μου κατά νου ότι ο χώρος είναι από τη φύση του ανοιχτός, αλλάζει διαρκώς, βρίσκεται εν κινήσει και ο μετασχηματισμός του αφορά τους πολίτες. Από την πόλη, στην πόλη, με την πόλη.
In conclusion, history shows us that the city can be viewed as a space in which freedom and direct democracy can thrive, but this can only happen by the citizens themselves, on the condition that citizens view space and urban space as inherently open and always in flux. And I would like to close with the phrase from the city, in the city, with the city.
Thank you very much, George. Now we will go straight to Dimitri Roussopoulos. Do you want to go first? Okay, so instead, next we are going to hear from Olney from Cork in Ireland, who's going to speak about cultivating a culture of resistance through collective design. Thank you, Eve.
Thanks. Just want to thank TRISE, first of all, for inviting me to speak. Can you hear me? Yeah. So this, my presentation is taken from a much longer paper, and it's based around maybe 2.5 years of practice research around the idea of cultivating a culture of resistance. Hang on, sorry, this is blocking. Is there any way of moving it? Anyway, through collective design, through a new type of approach, people-led approach to collective design. Yeah, thank you. Nope. If I can get on to the next slide.
The mouse to the right arrow.
Just, cheers, tap. So this particular approach to collective design, and the paper itself outlines the mapping and critiquing of how a radical pedagogy of collective design is being developed to cultivate cultures of resistance through a people-led, direct, democratic common assembly method. So this consideration of collective design is driven by a non-expert ethos that enables self-organized creative initiatives around social living that work outside of conventional schemes of disciplinary learning and practice. So therefore, that's why it's being termed as being radical. But the idea is that as we're developing this people-led collective design, the scheme is gradually being shaped into a structured socio-political project and a viable human praxis. So collective design is critically framed here as both an emergent and continuous material and philosophical process of community building. So there's no distinctions between the material and philosophical. It's thinking through making, I guess. So the underlying organizational principles then are drawn from the project of direct democracy as epitomized by Castoriadis's political praxis of autonomy and Bookchin's libertarian municipalism. The idea for collective design, this type of collective design, began with a project or an urban activist group that are based in Athens called Urban React, and they're currently involved in a long-term project with the inhabitants of a housing block in the district of Keseriani. So I became involved with them for about 2 years ago. And this is where the idea of trying to create or to kind of process a new type of collective design came into being. And then since then, because I'm based in Ireland, myself and others have been developing another project called the Living Commons. And within that, we're trying to basically reflect on what's been happening in Urban React in other places. And within the Irish project, there's a real kind of definitive attempt to build a perceptible culture of resistance within a very, very, very neoliberal Ireland. So again, I don't have time to go into there's more information on the Urban React project online, but it's basically it began around 2016, and it's again going through a people-led process of collective design, working with the inhabitants of this old refugee housing block. And the idea is to renovate the building and open up some of the empty apartments to house homeless people. So within this particular collective design then, we're interested in this kind of tacit learning that can occur rather than this idea of, I suppose, participatory planning, of this sort of explicit training on the ground where people are kind of told what's good design. So we're looking at it, and this is based, I'm quoting from Joe Curnow here, that it's the idea where the community itself is the curriculum as members are learning, reproducing and innovating through working together. So then in kind of starting the Irish project, I also, because this is my research practice, so I'm reflecting back on the Urban React, and this is just 3 sort of points that we came up with in how it kind of inform how we then sort of developed the Living Commons project in Ireland. So first of all, it was very apparent that people-led collective design is always shaped through the specific social context. And this goes beyond the idea of course, no one model will work else, in two separate places. But it's actually having to really respond to sometimes daily, sometimes weekly drastic changes. So, and that brings me on to the second point, in that then you really need someone on the ground continuously working in order to respond to those shifts and changes within different contexts. So again, in developing the Irish project, we recognise that you really need full-time commitment. You need people there, within this horizontal structure. You also need some sort of kind of core group to help structure and direct the project. Because it obviously takes a long time and consistency to build up trust and a shared sense of community. The other one, the main other point, was that there needs to be a more informed and structured approach towards dealing with conflict. Because again, as conflict arose, we just kind of dealt with it, whereas again, it was kind of understood that there should be an inbuilt systemic way of dealing with contestation within the collective design process itself. And we've since begun collaborating with another practice researcher who works specifically within nonviolent action. So the Living Commons is being developed literally only in the kind of last year. And again, it's implemented through collectively led social, ecological, cultural programs that enable those specifically in precarious living situations equal participation in social, cultural, economic and political life through the initiation of autonomously run collective design programs. So you can see there also what we're literally only doing is locating already existing programs within people in precarious situations, such as there's a lot of pockets of activism within asylum-seeking centres. They're called direct provision centres in Ireland. So it's basically we're locating these kind of acts and events and projects, and then engaging with them, and then trying to find a space where all these things kind of maybe work holistically and can be interlinked. So just to give a very brief context of within an Irish context. So the biggest challenge in Ireland to creating an alternative social imaginary is the neoliberal normalisation of crisis and poverty, and this dominant national narrative that we're all somehow complicit within our own crisis. So it's very much kind of mimicking the American idea of the poverty being your own fault. There's really widespread apathy. Of course, again, we have pockets, lots of activism, but nothing like what we're seeing across Europe, particularly in Barcelona and places like that at the moment. There's also a huge reliance on party politics to resolve people's problems. And again, this comes after the same, maybe since the beginning of the Republic, of the same two parties basically being the cause of people's crisis, ongoing crisis, and yet people really seem to be looking to the government and to management to resolve their problems. So again, this aligns for me with Bookchin's argument that the state justifies its existence in part not only on the indifference of its constituents to public affairs, but also and significantly on the alleged inability of its constituents to manage public affairs. So again, through the Living Commons, this is something that we're very kind of specifically focused on. So again, as I said, I'm both involved in the projects, but I'm also developing it as a practice research project in order to kind of consistently critically reflect back on what we're doing. So within the Living Commons then, we started targeting arts funding in order to support ourselves. So we came up with, about 2.5 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, I came up with a anti-neoliberal praxis called Architecture Activism. So it's a collaborative scheme that basically really targets arts funding in order to fund social projects, for long-term social projects, to support and initiate them, and then as well within an exhibition format to give them this public platform of engagement. So we put in an application to the Arts Council. We're quite lucky in Ireland as well, because not lucky in Ireland, but there's an Arts Council fund that is incredibly difficult to get, but once you do secure it, it's kind of sufficiently autonomous. They basically give you the money and leave you alone. So we were able to actually get funding through this source, and then that helped us develop the Living Commons as one of 5 projects that we developed around the idea of the housing crisis and kind of looking at alternative solutions in addressing it through collective practice and self-organisation. So, and then the projects themselves were given a public platform in a 2-week exhibition in the city, or the city centre of Cork. And the idea is as well that we inhabit an empty building, a prominent empty building, for the 2 weeks, and and then that to try and get that kind of footfall. So again, it's the idea of, it's not for the sake of the art, it's the sake of the social project, and the art helps in facilitating, being able to communicate the projects to people. So then it really became a vehicle from the, we called it Spare Room, by the way, in case you're confused by Spare Room. So the first one was in Athens about 2 years ago, and that was led mainly by the Urban React project. And this was called Spare Room, and it was mainly kind of led by the Living Commons project. So then the exhibition itself and the preparation became a vehicle from which we began mapping and engaging with all the existing social projects in Ireland, and beyond that, whether subconsciously or deliberately, work on principles of commoning and self-organisation. So over the 2 weeks then, you can see we had invited lots of different people to put on or to present discussions and workshops all around kind of commoning practices. As you can see there, we had, again, the idea of different social imaginaries in what would a feminist city look like. Again, addressing the idea of conflict within collective design, role play for non-violent action, etc. So we had really good public response to these workshops, and also it really works successfully as a social space, because there are no social spaces like that in Cork City. It's like other kind of cities that there's really kind of no such thing as public space where you're not being sold something. So we had the People's Kitchen, and people could come in and have a meal. People really, the area is quite kind of socially deprived, or known to be. So we had loads of people coming in and really engaging with the topic, and also we accumulated an awful lot of names and contacts of people now who want to go on and work with us in the Living Commons, either peripherally or directly. We also, through the project, secured an amazing permanent space, autonomous space, with land next to it. So now we can actually begin. The exhibition literally ended about a week and a half ago, and Kate is part of it as well. So the next, but the plan is basically that we're working towards a self-sustainable living model within 3 to 5 years. So again, it's this idea of bringing everything that already exists and interlinking them. So again, one of the next jobs for us is to create a visible online mapping of the project, so people can actually see each other. Because we've noticed actually people are literally a few miles from each other and they don't know each other exists. And again, they're kind of working within the same ethos. And because they're widespread around Ireland as well, we've already now kind of established that we can have a very kind of broad kind of network, so it's not going to be insular or kind of parochial. But so that's our kind of next job, if you like, is to interlink all these. And then as people are, and the idea is then that people will be invited within the space and within the land to engage in these public programs, the collective design programs. So then there's a great sort of kind of sharing of skills. They use the space as they want. And then the idea is to create this sort of more kind of holistic living and working scheme where we're interlinking things, just say like obvious things like the garden or perma-farming with the kitchen, but then also linking that in itself to alternative ways of looking at mental health, etc. So the existing programs then have been set up by those who have specific needs and have acted upon the needs. So the objective is to build up this network social framework, as I said. And again, as the geographer Melissa García-Lamarca argues, that these type of collective advising assemblies are spaces where other people then can begin to disidentify with their position in the dominant economic and political configuration and begin to shed their guilt, shame and fear and materialize new ways of acting and being. So again, it's that idea of, again, within an Irish context, that really kind of makes sense because people are so sort of ingrained in this kind of helpless situation, and they're constantly comparing their own kind of position in a much kind of global context. So it just seems, that they have no power. So again, to quote Bookchin, he talks about the tangible power embodied in organised forms of freedom that are rationally conceived and democratically constituted. So it's within this paradigm that I'd like to situate the possibility of building a tangible culture of resistance in response to the current social order of governance. And again, when I'm saying I'm talking about loads of people, not we. So again, just to emphasize the idea of non-expert, it doesn't assume that our participants have equal knowledge, obviously, because everybody has different variants of advantages, social advantages, disadvantages, but a people-led process does assume an equal capacity to contribute and learn and become an active, self-empowered member of the community. So again, to quote Eric Rogoff, which goes back to the tacit, the idea of kind of foregrounding tacit knowledge, this entails placing values on a knowledge that would be presented in relation to an urgent issue and not an issue as defined by knowledge conventions, but by the pressures and struggles of contemporaneity in the sense that ambition knows or poverty knows. So again, it's drawing from people's own experience, again, that kind of cliche, but it's true, the experience of, you're the expert in your own life experience, and it's valuing that as kind of, as valued knowledge. So just to conclude then with this quote from Bookchin, that the citizens must be capable intellectually as well as physically of performing all the necessary functions in their community that are today undertaken by the state. Once citizens are capable of self-management, however, the state can be liquidated both institutionally and subjectively, replaced by free and educated citizens in popular assemblies. So again, that would be our rather kind of grand long-term goal within the kind of idea or the paradigm of the Living Commons through this process of people-led collective design. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eve. Oh, we'll put Skype back on. Markus, are you there? No.
I probably killed Markus.
Yes.
Woohoo! Okay.
I'm still here.
Okay.
Excellent. Okay,
You
so
got me?
yeah, we got you.
Right.
Yeah, we'll put. Okay, so finally we have Dimitri Roussopoulos, who is now going to talk on radical municipalism, a growing socio-political trend. Thank you, Dimitri.
Well, first a word of regret that I didn't meet Eve before today, so that when I was in Dublin 2 weeks ago, we would have had the pleasure of having real, substantial discussions. Next time.
That's Yammer's fault.
Next time. At the beginning of the 19th century, the 20th century, I'm a creature of the 19th century, so my heart and soul are there. At the beginning of the 20th century, however, there was a split in the socialist movement. And that split was manifested by the creation of a body of thought and action called municipal socialism. And municipal socialism, without going into details because we don't have the time to do that, was most present in France. But the thread of that idea that at the municipal level, certain substantial changes could be made, entered into the DNA of social and human history. In the 1960s, when a whole new generation contested the consumer society and fought for human and civil rights and against the war in Vietnam specifically, the whole social movement, the new left, rotated around some pretty fundamental ideas. One of them was participatory democracy. That is to say, a critique of liberal and representative democracy, which we analyzed as being a mediated form of democracy, a mediated form of participation. And what we declared in the context of the body of participatory democracy is that we wanted the power to decide at the local level. And by the local level, we didn't necessarily only mean the city, but also the neighborhood. And we particularly wanted to help organize what was called, and still is called, the underclass. The people who are shoved aside in our society if they are not part of an organized social and political force. And later on, there was a split amongst the Greens, especially in Europe. And those Greens who sought to remain faithful to the origins of Green politics, radical Green politics, sought to enter a field of contestation at the local, municipal, and regional level rather than farting around in the Bundesstaat and in national parliaments. That was part of another split within the Green movement. Now, these splits happen for reasons, and we have to know them, why they take place, and study them. Because if we're not to repeat the tragedies of history endlessly, we have to know what to do and how to do it. And there is a very interesting history that we have to really become masters of if we are to be effective activists. For instance, we have to know that at the beginning of the 20th century, in the United States, as an example, there was a whole range of socialist cities. That is to say, the American socialists at that epoch were more intelligent, in my view, than the pathetic American left of today. They actually concentrated on important cities all over the country. This is before the First World War. And in some cases actually were elected at city council. And they were trying to transform American society from the bottom up. And there are a number of reasons why that whole history was compromised and did not come to fruition. But in other places, we had, for example, in 1919, Red Vienna. How many of us in this room know about the history of Red Vienna, 1919 to 1934, and all the radical reforms that were introduced in the area of housing, transportation, human welfare, and so on and so forth? How many of us have studied the whole history, the ups and down history of Red Bologna, another very interesting experience in human history? I mean, full of contradictions and problems and so on and so forth, but they are actually shifts in political thinking and political action that are important for us to know. And then there was Grenoble. It was another very important cauldron for us to study about what the urban left of Grenoble managed to do. And finally, but not ultimately, in my own city, Montreal, a very significant history that started in the 1970s, shifting towards the left and creating a whole phenomena called the Montreal urban left and its history. And that, all of that, is part of a very important stream in human history which precedes what happened in this city of Athens. In other words, we should not have the illusion or the misinformation that assembly democracy was born in this country and elsewhere in Greece. It preceded. Assembly democracy preceded, and I say this with a touch of regret, but it's true, it's a historical fact. And there's one recent book, for example, The Life and Death of Democracy, this thick, that traces the whole concept that wherever human beings congregate and wherever human beings seek to create the sinews of community, they inevitably create a form of decision-making which puts a tremendous amount of importance and emphasis on the assembly, where there is a form of egalitarianism and a form of horizontal decision-making. We have to know all that. And then we bring ourselves into the present, into a contemporary period. And I don't want to speak too long because I really want us to engage in a discussion, not just a question and answer period, but a discussion, because to me this is the kernel, the discussion, the debate, the dialogue. To me this is the kernel of this conference, and it succeeds or fails on our ability to crack that kernel together. We bring it into a contemporary period, and that contemporary period gives us the following insights based on experience. How is it that in a city, the second biggest city in Canada, the city called Montreal, how is it, explain to me, that in the downtown core of the city, not the suburb, not a periphery of the city, but right in the middle of the city, a community project emerges from the grassroots. A community struggle emerges as a result of that, and turns market capitalism on its head. Turns market capitalism on its head by creating the largest non-profit cooperative housing project on an urban land trust in North America. How is that achieved? Took a long time, several decades, but it was achieved. Wherein some 1,500 ordinary people live, not some isolated commune in the countryside growing potatoes. I'm talking about a real urban phenomenon. 1,500 people live in various kinds of housing, creating a land trust. I don't know how many of you know that term, but it is a economic and political phenomena whereby the land is owned in common. The land is removed from the capitalist marketplace. And as a result of removing the land from the capitalist marketplace, there can be no private property. There can be no buying and selling of housing. Can you imagine that? In this century? Well, it was done. And as a result of it having been done, it started radiating outward, especially in the last year and a half, because it takes a great deal of preparatory work in terms of ideas, in terms of discussions, to move the whole thing forward in people's awareness. There's a whole interesting history about that. And so that in the last year and a half, 3 major community meeting events have taken place, one larger than the other, where the whole concept of community land, the ownership of land communally was discussed and debated thoroughly, where cooperative housing, non-profit cooperative housing, was given a radical edge, and where even the notion of the municipalization of urban land was put forward in a concluding declaration, the Montreal Declaration. How do you like them beans? And it ended with a citizens' assembly, which was also a significant event in teaching citizens, as we teach each other, that we are the power, we are the ones who acquiesce, we are the one who give them the mandate to rule over us, and God damn it, we're going to take it back. And that's what we are saying with a louder and louder voice. And in this book called Villages in Cities, I think there are a few copies out there, you could read the whole history and the whole analysis of this struggle that I just identified for you in a few minutes. So I want to conclude by saying that social ecology is absolutely meaningless. Absolutely meaningless. I say that unconditionally, if it is not based on libertarian municipalism, if it is not based on taking the neighborhoods and the cities in hand. The rest is mumbo jumbo. Social ecology is nothing if it doesn't have politics. If it doesn't have politics, it amounts to a hill of beans. And this is the challenge in front of us, and the challenge that TRISE is trying to meet. And I'm pleased to say that next spring, a book that is called Take the City on Radical Municipalism will be published, and it will include all sorts of interesting chapters. And we're bringing together several generations of thinkers, everybody from Peter Markus and David Harvey and Jonathan Foucault, and a whole bunch of people who are going to reflect together on what it means to put forward an agenda of radical municipalism. So let's get on with it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dimitri. So now we are going to open it up to the floor for discussion, questions, comments. We have about 10-15 minutes. So yeah, who's got a question or a comment? Yeah.
Hi, thanks everyone for the talks. We hear lots now about how the policy.
You know what? I think the people on this panel are Democrats. And as Democrats, we want to share these microphones with you. Why should I strain myself to hear you when you didn't strain yourself to hear me? So come up and use the microphone.
Okay.
It's melody.
ready?
Hi. So the UN report that people quite often talk about now recently suggests that half of all people now live in cities and in urban areas for the first time in human history. But it still means that half of all people are still living in rural areas, and most of the time these are the most marginalized people on the planet, the urban kind of peasantry. And whole swathes of left-wing thought are devoted to the role that the rural folk will have it as a revolutionary object, if such a thing exists. How do these kind of ideas and trends of radical urbanism and radical municipalism address this kind of issue? I don't know. Yeah, it's more of a comment than a question.
Would anyone like to respond to that?
Well, I can only speak in context to the Living Commons project I was talking about. And one of the property I showed you is about a 40-minute walk from the city centre. But at the same time, we've been negotiating with missionaries for the last year and a half of securing quite a substantial property in the countryside, which has a surrounding, it's in West Cork and it has a surrounding population of 2,500 people or something. So yeah, I can only respond in terms, yes, we do think of that, and also because the precarious people that we're dealing with are in these direct provision centres, which are sometimes hotels in the middle of nowhere. So it's again with that kind of sensibility and being conscious of that we're trying to set up both at the same time.
Anybody else? Would you like to come up to the...
No. I would like actually to ask Markus, could you please explain this impossible argument once more, because I'm not sure if I get it. So. Okay,
Markus, I presume you didn't hear that.
Yes, I heard it.
Oh, good. Okay, go ahead.
It was it's my idea of combining the destroying and the creating aspects, the constructive and what it's actually the theme of the conference, but there's also something that Bakunin and I think the whole of anarchist tradition talks about is we want to destroy what impedes our autonomy, but also create something else. And I think this is something that goes beyond the overtaking what's already there, but to something else. And the impossible argument is at once something that is impossible. So you could imagine the old anarchist creed in the 60s and 70s was to demand the impossible, but something else to this as well is that the impossible argument is also kind of a noun that we need to, it's my suggestion that we make root impossible, that we create a condition or a society where it is at least very, very hard for people to take power over us. So that's like in contrast to the old the classical socialist creed to overtake the state. And so the impossible argument is to make the state impossible. If I don't know how to do that, but
yes, please. Yeah.
I'll try to come.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It was a great panel, very, very interesting and inspiring. I want to ask the big question about money, funding. You outlined for us how you managed to secure some funding via connecting arts with architecture and social aspects, and I think that's a very nice idea. But in general, we're all faced with the reality of needing money for whatever we want to implement, and usually there is funding from all sides available one way or another, but it always means that there's big trade-offs, especially ethically, and usually the more generous and substantial the fund is, the bigger are the trade-offs. So if you are at a stage where you would like to create something, you know, take back the city, do whatever, but you don't have the cash, how do you go about it? What are people's thoughts on kind of doing this in a socio-ecological way, in a radical way, in an anarchist way, in a feminist way? What are your proposals for help in this?
Well, I can just respond to, again, within the context of the Living Commons. Oh, sorry. The funding is really rare, it's really hard to get, so this is the first time in ever that we've got funding. So we're used to just working without funding. And basically we look for kind of loopholes either in the law, or it's been a huge kind of learning process in going from some, from that we would be just generally very critical and suspicious of institutions, and then through talking to individuals or whatever, that there's sometimes good people within like really, really bad corrupt institutions. So it's basically by our kind of research practice and meeting loads of people, and then you get to, particularly Ireland, I think it might work specifically in the context of Ireland because it's quite small. So the land that, again, that's really interesting, you're talking about land trusts and land leases, because there's a big movement at the moment that's being led by SOA, self-organised architecture, who are looking into kind of land trusts and long-term land leases as a means of commoning living. So we're basically securing both properties through long-term land leases. And it's based we have to be very specifically a very good lawyer who just happens, again, to be very sympathetic to what we're doing and is fully supportive. So again, she's bringing us step by step through the kind of how not to be co-opted, how to protect our interests. And again, because there's such sort of an appetite for this at the moment in Ireland, that there is a lot of legal advice available. Again, through SOA, they hold conferences, and they hold what they call kind of cafes in different cities. So again, you get legal advice, financial advice, and they support you within securing them. So yeah, without money, we've been able to, we're in negotiation of getting a 100-year lease of land in the country, in West Cork, and we're also negotiating the long-term lease of the land in the city centre as well. So again, it's the only, I suppose, epiphany that that happened was that we began to be more open, actually, to talking to people who had, even though they are capitalist, and we will always be very, very suspicious and cynical, and we'll pull out as soon as anything happens that we're not happy with, but there are sort of ways that we can kind of legally protect ourselves. And again, it's just a learning process, it's quite experimental, and it's the first in Ireland, so we just have to see how it works out.
I love that question, and it's fun to answer it. And there are answers to it. 3 parts. First, to fund a project, a significant project, even a radical project, takes brilliant leadership and a very tenacious leadership. I'll give you my own experience. In order to accomplish what we did in this project called Milton Park, we, after a bitter struggle, urban struggle, that took a decade and a half to 2 decades of systematic door-to-door work, assemblies of citizens, information bulletins, demonstrations, sit-ins, going to jail, the whole gamut. We managed to get $25 to $30 million of public money to buy out the 6-block area, to renovate it to the level of the National Housing Code, which means new electricity. It was an old neighborhood, so-called, but it was a heritage neighborhood. Do everything to bring the whole level and to involve human beings, people like us in the process. We had to play very dirty, tough. And we had to absolutely blackmail, intimidate the power structure. I'm being serious here. I mean, they don't fool around with their power. Well, we're not going to fool around with our power, too. So, for example, when the authority said, all right, we'll arrange for this public money to become available for you to do what you want to do, but the consequence of doing it is that the value of your property, of all these houses, 647 different kinds of housing units in the 6-block area of downtown Montreal, the consequence of you managing to do that is that the value of it are going to increase, and therefore the value of all of this is going to have to match the market around what you manage to do. And the market around requires you to pay more for your housing. And we said to the bureaucrats, fuck you, we're not going to do it that way. You're going to give us the public money at a level of interest where not a single human being, poor, jobless, dependent on housing, not a single human being is going to be forced to leave this neighborhood. And you know what? They capitulated. They gave us exactly what we wanted because they knew that we had a fist and we would hit them for all it was worth. Of course, there were historical circumstances and we knew how to manipulate the situation. But all I'm trying to say is that you have to be brilliant, you have to be very tough, you have to be, and you can win. So that's example number one. Example number two is that in the United States and in Europe, there are certain foundations that support left-of-center projects. And these foundations in the United States and in Europe, far fewer in Canada, tend to have less strings attached to them. And a lot of these things can be negotiated, you know? If they really think that what you're doing is important in their framework, they tend to bend with your requests and respect your values. So that's a very important consideration. You have to do the homework, find out who they are, and you have to lobby them. You have to prepare the project, and you know all that stuff. So that is the second part and the third part of my answer. In Europe, there are these opportunities. They're also in the United States. I don't know if they are available in other countries. One thing I will say in conclusion, raising money is not an obstacle to radical change.
Thank you, Dimitri. So we are actually quite over time. Do you want a quick question?
Yeah, I have a quick question in a loud voice so I can speak from here. A question for Eve. I was curious, you described the context in Ireland in which the Living Commons is taking place. So taking that into consideration, did you find any kind of obstacles in terms of how people thought about the project? Were there any kind of common sense ideas that people had that didn't allow them to engage in the way that they wanted, or did you see any patterns in that? Something that stood out in particular?
Well, we began with the obstacle was that nobody, you know, if you talk about commoning in Ireland, they just think you're an idealist, you know. Cooperative isn't even a legal term there, and actually we don't have the sort of community banking or trusts for co-housing, because the central bank in Ireland prevents them from doing business in Ireland, so we don't have those opportunities that other Europeans have in England, just say. So it's such, I mean, is a massive culture of, such an endemic culture of home ownership in Ireland. It's like the pinnacle of success. And up to very recently, only because of the crisis, renting was just a means to owning your own home. So it's really within this kind of lingering mindset still, I mean, even up to now, when people can't afford anything, there's still this sort of, the main goal is to own your own home. So that was the obstacle. The obstacle was, this is why we worked through art practice. We literally just use it as a tool, as a way of engaging and explaining what are very kind of complex things, usually, in really simple ways. So, and again, it's something like the people's kitchen. So people come in, we're having a meal, we're talking about what's on the walls. It works that way. It's very slowly, it's within the collective design process, basically, that these things will come into being, the idea of alternatives. So from the very beginning, and particularly it started with Urban React, you can't just go in and talk politics to people, they're not interested. That's very, you know, you can't dictate an ideology. It's through kind of practice, looking at what our needs are, discussing what our needs are, and then addressing that. So it's that way of doing it as opposed to any sort of agenda. So yeah, so as I said, the obstacle is the main thing in the beginning, and it's then trying to find ways or practices, processes around that we can start communicating and, you know, putting that message across.
Great. It's lunchtime. Thank you so much to all our speakers.